Welcome back, guys. Welcome to another Game Time Discussions. I'm Emery Cuzzy. I'm sitting here with Cameron Selby, and we'll be going over the main slate for Week 7 of the NFL season. Super exciting slate. Lots of high scores in this on this slate, which is something I'll let you talk about.
Yeah, so with the 5 highest totals, you would have pinched me and thought I was dreaming if I said the Panthers and the Commanders Week 7 was the highest total on the slate. 52 is the total. Next up, Seattle and the Falcons being 51. The Lions and Vikings, which made us so much money last year. Shout out to Nick Mullins at 49.5. Then Texans Packers, a fun non-conference game, 47.5. Both of those teams very strong. And then a Super Bowl rematch between the Chiefs and the 49ers at 46.5. Again, there's a couple of Monday night games this week. There's a Sunday night game. There's a Thursday, obviously, and then there's the London game as well between the Patriots and Jags. So another kind of smaller slate despite only 2 buys, but it should be a fun one. We're recording this a little bit later in the week due to technical difficulties with our previous recording, but also this was the right week to have that if there was one, because there was so much unknown and we were playing pretend with a lot of these lines and builds and running backs out galore kind of thing. And so now we have a tad bit more clarity on where things are going. It makes it difficult in some spots, but it can make it a little bit more self-explanatory in others.
Yeah, I mean, it's still happening. I mean, we're still going through it. We're actually recording this probably 30 minutes before it gets released, to an hour before it gets released. So it is Thursday night where we'll be playing Thursday Night Football. If you get in our Discord, you can see those lines because things have changed on that slate because we talked about Taysom Hill being in. He is now not going to be in. So, the injury bug is out for sure. Let me throw this up on the board so we can see it. At the moment, this is not all the players. I just wanted to kind of talk about, we're going to obviously get into our favorite quarterbacks and making it easier. A lot of our favorite quarterbacks are in the same games. So the first game we will talk about is the Carolina-Washington game that you brought up.
Right. And so kind of similar thing I told you about the Commanders-Panthers. Obviously, this is the highest total for a reason. That's why we've got to talk about both of them. But Jaden Daniels on the slate that has Mahomes and Josh Allen, all these other guys, CJ Stroud, Joe Burrow, to name others. And he's the highest, most expensive guy. Yep. And it's worth it and worthy, and we're still considering playing him, is a crazy feat for a rookie. He's had such a sensational start. Terry McLaurin has been playing out of his mind after a slow start to the year. 4 straight weeks, over 17 points. Obviously, he scored 2 touchdowns in a losing effort. Very good loss to a really good Baltimore team on the road, and he's really the only guy that's getting consistent stuff. Noah Brown has had some kind of spark on some snap counts. Zach Ertz had 4 for 68 last week, but otherwise it's really just them. Brian Robinson's had a strong year, but he missed last week. Austin Eckler was in his place.
Limited today.
Yeah, so one of those things that in our first look we were kind of anticipating, because he had a DNP the entire week, that he would not play, and this is the best running back matchup you can have without question this week. I mean, you look at the Panthers and what they allowed to Bijan Robinson, not Brian
last
Robinson
week,
now,
and Tyler Algier.
200 plus yards and 3 touchdowns between them. They've by far leading the league in touchdowns allowed to running backs, and so both of these guys are still in play. I think the ownership will be lower than it should be because of the injury to Robinson, and then if he indeed does play, nobody's going to want to play Eckler at 59, but they're still both viable. You just saw both of them, Algier and Bijan, and multiple before go off and have success. So both are in the player pool for sure.
Yeah, and I think if Brian Robinson is out, we will have to be talking about Austin Eckler because of the fact that he is in such a good spot. Jeremy McNichols is the other guy, but if you have to go down to 4,400 and you need the salary relief, because there are some stud receivers on this slate that you might want to get to. But on the other side of the game, because that, like we said, they're in pairs. This is one of our other our puke plays. Normally we don't bring the pukes up this early, but we will this time because, like I said, multiple games where we're going to get both quarterbacks as much as possible. So
right, and welcome back, Andy Dalton, to the puke group. I mean, he was the one that started this run that we've been on over the last few weeks, and he had the spot started against the Raiders, and then put up 36 and 3 touchdowns, 300 yards, at 5,000 or below wherever he was, and it was awesome. The problem was at that time we didn't picked the right receiver because we went Thielen route. We didn't go the Deontay route. Thielen gets hurt on a touchdown catch and Deontay gets 100 yards. Still would have worked out doing both or one or the other. But since then, Deontay has been the guy.
Oh, yeah.
Aside of 1 week where he essentially had a dud, but Chuba was the guy that went off in the better matchup between the two. But in the 3-game sample size with that he did produce well, 29 fantasy points and a touchdown, 21 fantasy points and a touchdown, 19.8 fantasy points. So he scored 3 of the 4 games. He's a DNP the first 2 days of the week, but he's done that the last couple of weeks because of an ankle injury. It's more so maintenance. So even though usually you can't really project DNPs on Thursdays to play, I would be shocked if he actually did not play. And if he does, then doing a single stack with him or really all of these guys that Carolina has, it's pretty wide open and it provides a ton of relief. You talk about Chuba Hubbard. It sounds like there's going to be one more week without Jonathan Brooks, and obviously he's been crushing as well. Hasn't been below 15 fantasy points. He scored in 2 games, even though despite having a couple fumbles in back-to-back weeks, he's still getting, workhorse workload. And he's a 5-box running back that's playing on the road. And, you could feel great about playing him if you could. Xavier Legette has scored 2 straight games, I believe, or two of the last 3. I'm sorry, in week 5, he left the game with an injury. But two healthy games, scoring double digits back-to-back weeks. So he's in the play as well. 5,100, not many people are going to play him. Jatavion Sanders, he's been playing snaps, but he wasn't getting the targets. Well, he's gotten 12 targets in the last 2 weeks combined. Last week went 5 for 49, which is he's still under 3,000. So you need salary relief.
Yeah.
And you don't feel good about a Jalen Coker, who actually has some value because, according to RotoWire, at minimum price, doing something like that as the last guy in is completely fine and relevant. I mean, obviously, he was a guy that was a healthy scratch for the first 3 weeks,
right?
And then he barely was targeted, and then back-to-back games where he's basically caught every single target. Actually had 10.8 against Chicago, in relief of Xavier Legette going down. So again, if you want to double, there's kind of a couple ways to go, but the second piece is very, very uncomfortable. Is what we're getting at.
Yeah, I'd rather play $2,900 Jatavion Sanders than Jalen Coker, in my personal opinion.
And usually, if we do a double tight end, it's something where it's 2 relevant tight ends. Well, I actually have a first look, and we'll talk about a little later that I may go double tight end. And it looks weird, but you just got to pretend, hey, instead of Jalen Coker, it's Jatavion Sanders, and just kind of go from there. But yeah, moving on to another game that we love getting to today. You want to, or do you want to do the solo first?
I can do Green. Yeah, let's do Green Bay first.
CJ Stroud still in the player pool. Problem is, it's just there's really not a lot of value now, especially now that we know that a lot more running backs are practicing. Jordan Love, it's a lot easier to get to. Dontavian Wicks, he is week to week with an injury to his shoulder. Tucker Kraft, coming off a 2-touchdown game, had a dud, but he's still everything that they have at tight end. Luke Musgrave's on IR now. Christian Watson had a long touchdown last week.
Quick check.
3 for 68.
44-yard long,
Played a ton of snaps. And then Romeo Doubs was suspended the previous week, came back, and then in
2 touchdown
game. Jaden Reed actually left the game, but he scored again. He's been incredible when Jordan Love has been in the lineup. Obviously, 3 straight games over 13, but now he's kind of getting up there in price. But it's a lot easier to afford these guys compared to Houston, where CJ Stroud, you want to play him cool, but you got to go all the way up to 77 for Stephon Diggs. Joe Mixon's above 7, and he's banged up, but he came right back and scored 30 last week. Dalton Schultz still hasn't had his touchdown. Reasonable tight end if you want to go in the mid-tier. But Tank Dell, who finally had his first breakout game, we were on the right side of saying that he's the true wide receiver 3 in this offense, and he's shown that now he's been inherited as a wide receiver 2, but his price went all the way to 65. So it's really tough to do a double, and CJ Stroud's one of those quarterbacks that we don't really prioritize or green light a single stack with, just because he really doesn't provide anything on the ground. So this game, both guys you can get to, but Green Bay, it's a little bit easier because of the affordability of the secondary option, whether that's Tucker Kraft or the second receiver, whoever you want to play.
Yeah, exactly. Josh Jacobs is also in play if you wanted to go that route. He's 6,400, which is probably the cheapest he's been Let's see.
I think it's tied for it.
Okay, yeah, that's pretty cheap for him overall. So he's
Just know
also there.
Houston is fairly strong against running backs, but the problem is with their defense, even though it is solid, they do get pressure.
Mhm.
They have given up big chunk plays and
Right.
stuff like that throughout the year. So that's kind of one of those things where it's kind of a wide open and on how this game will kind of play out from a fantasy perspective.
Yes. And then my favorite game of the week
Yeah, by far.
is the Minnesota-Detroit game. We're going to have to talk about both sides of that game. Detroit, starting with Detroit, both running backs have been awesome in Jahmyr Gibbs and David Montgomery. David Montgomery is actually the better fantasy point producer at the moment, but that's okay. We'll
kind of helps when you score in every single game that you play.
Exactly.
And stuff. He's been even better and as good as advertised. We've always liked him. And Jahmyr Gibbs has not been as relevant in the passing game that we've kind of would think, but also they're dominating teams in recent weeks, especially last week against Dallas, which was expected, but a little too wide of a gap for our liking because we were heavily invested in the Dallas side of things for doubles and what have you. And but yeah, look at the numbers and the touches and stuff, and
crazy.
Hasn't scored below 15. Great spot. The only thing is both Detroit and Minnesota are top 2 respectively against running backs scoring this year. So it is kind of tough to think of the run game as stackable options, but the pass game, obviously Amon-Ra St. Brown has been incredible, but he is outside of week 2 against Tampa Bay has really kind of been a pedestrian workload in terms of target share. Last year we were accustomed to him 12 to 14 targets and 7-8 receptions a game, and really he's only eclipsed 7 receptions one time this year, and that was in a game they were trailing in 19 fantasy points. So being on the road against Minnesota played them very well back-to-back games last year with Nick Mullins, and Nick Mullins, the reason we like Minnesota side as well, 700 yards in 2 games. Amon-Ra had a great chunk of production in that game as well. So, I mean, both those guys are up top. Jameson Williams, this has been his breakout year. The concerning thing is, even though 4 of the 5 games he's been above 14 fantasy points, his price is more expensive than it's ever been, but his target share has been so low in the last 3 weeks that this just feels like a terrible spot to go all in on him again.
Yeah.
Because I think this is a week where it could turn into people are overexposed to him and he just kind of goes the 4 targets, but he doesn't have that 70-yard touchdown that he's been having in, 3 times this year.
A little trappy. For sure.
Feels a little trappy. Sam Laporta, another guy, he finally got into the end zone last week, but
crazy stat.
1 catch on a flea flicker for 52 yards and a touchdown.
Yep.
He's been an absolute zero as the tight end 1 overall. We were a little concerned that the gap was too wide and we were investing in other tight ends because of that. He was still among our top 2 and he was back and forth with Kelsey, and that was the same with everybody, and everybody was wrong.
Right, yeah, exactly. It wasn't just us.
He's had no game above 5 targets, and it's not a health thing. It's not a banged up thing. He just isn't being prioritized. So, he's kind of touchdown or bust, and he's above 53. So it's kind of tough to get there. Minnesota, it's a lot clear cut where you're going.
Right.
Sam Darnold off a bye week, obviously he's been incredible. He had a down game against the Jets, which can't really fault you for. They're really strong, above average defense. But I mean, they really don't spread the ball nearly as much as Detroit does in terms of their target share. It's JJ being the wide receiver 1. Obviously last year, I wanted to bring this up again because it's incredible. We're talking about sample size games against Detroit in his career. You got 9 for 133. You got 7 for 124. You got 11 for 182 in a score. You have a dud game. 11 for 223, 6 for 141 in a score, and then 12 for 192 most recently with the touchdown last year. And both of those last 2 samples were again with Nick Mullins at the helm. Sam Darnold has been playing much better than a Nick Mullins.
Yes.
So he is somebody that we're really, really prioritizing this week. Jordan Addison, another week. He's been dealing with ankle sprains and stuff throughout the season so far. Obviously, not great production for somebody that was, at one point a 6th, 7th round pick in best ball. But I mean, he's another week healthy. Jalen Naylor actually played a ton of snaps last week, but didn't even get targeted, or the last game they played rather. So, he's kind of falling out of favor. T.J. Hawkinson.
Woohoo.
He's eligible to return. He's been limited the first 2 practices. It sounds like he'll play. His first game back being against his former team.
Right.
Obviously a revenge spot. This is the game where the last time they played Detroit, his knee got taken out. That was the first game, actually.
Yeah.
Because the second game we did Johnny Munn. Johnny Munn was fantasy relevant in our double that we did. But TJ, revenge game. Also the injury return game where he last played. It all fits.
Yeah.
And he's going to have basically zero ownership with all the tight ends in the 5K range that actually have a really solid matchups this week. So very fun if you want to go that route as well. Aaron Jones, for the record, he's been dealing with a hip and a hammy, and he was a true unknown because they went through a bye last week, and you didn't know how the week to week would actually turn out. And he's been limited, so just remains to be seen. But they also traded for Cam Akers this week, so even though if hypothetically Aaron Jones is not available, it's not just the Tyler Chandler show anymore. Obviously, they would not make that trade unless it was for a really valid reason. So just kind of wait and see with that. But also, again, Detroit really tough against running backs that aren't Kenneth Walker.
Exactly.
So, I mean, just kind of be wary of investing if that's one of the pieces that you want.
For sure. I added the games but didn't take the other ones off. So let me grab these. But we're going to talk about the Rams versus the Raiders. The Rams first. Kyren is one of our favorite plays on the whole slate. He has just been everything. He gets 25 plus touches. He's at home. He's a 5-box running back this week. He's making him one of the best plays on the slate, but he's also 8,100, which makes it a little bit more nerve-wracking than anything. Cooper Kupp might be back, though, so that's interesting, too.
Yeah, so with Cooper Kupp, I mean, he's been practicing limited each of the last 2 weeks, but there's still no official word that he will return. But again, even if he does return, I wouldn't be too worried about an ankle sprain.
Right.
We just saw Joe Mixon after a 3-week hiatus drop 30 and being the RB2 overall in the week. So, I mean, injuries, yeah, you're going to have maybe less snaps. You might have a target or two less, but
he's
the last time we saw him, he had his healthy game where he had a 19 target game. And, he's really all they got. But even in his absence, or if he's limited in any way, Tutu Atwell has been very solid and underrated from a fantasy production standpoint without Puka and Cooper Kupp over the last few weeks. I mean, I don't believe that he's been below 11 fantasy points since then. Jordan Whittington having a really strong... No, you're good.
It's slow.
But yeah, so each of the last 3 weeks, 13,
targets,
12, 12 with a bunch of targets.
Jordan Whittington.
Whittington, each of the last 2 weeks, 8 and 10 targets respectively, 6 and 7. He was a breakout preseason star.
Yes.
And he's starting to get more and more reps because of that. So he is dealing with the Q tag as well. And then Colby Parkinson, out of nowhere, 13 targets.
Perfect.
So Matthew Stafford's very much hey, we're going to throw it a lot, and we're going to throw it to these 3 or 4 guys, and that's it. So, and then on top of that, again, you mentioned Kyren being one of the leading snap share guys, one of the highest volume guys. He's a 5-box running back this week, one of our favorite plays on the entire slate.
And he is the thumbnail. I know Cam hasn't seen the thumbnail yet. We actually have Justin Jefferson and Kyren on Beautiful. It. Yeah, I think it's the best way, right? That
would have been my nominees for sure. And then on the other side, we're talking another kind of pew stack, Aiden O'Connell, 4,800. And this is mainly just kind of, there's not much value this week at receiver or running back based on not being extremely chalky guys. So obviously Devontae Adams, the big news this week, he was traded, but he's been playing a few weeks without him regardless.
Yeah.
The biggest news that is for season long perspective is Brock Bowers is just going to continue being a dominant tight end one like we hoped and knew he would be. And obviously we were much higher on him than any other platform in redraft rankings and stuff. And we still were too low on him. We should have been more confident to put him in the tier 1 like we should have. Is what it is. Each of the last 2 weeks, 12 targets, 10 targets, 8 and 9 receptions respectively. He's just been incredible. He's basically fighting with George Kittle, who's been scoring a ton of touchdowns, being the tight end 1 overall. So he's in a great spot against the Rams. Easy bring back. Somehow his price went down after last week. I don't know how, but one thing of note is Jacoby Myers. He missed last week.
I was going to say.
Each of the first 2 days this week, he remained sidelined at practice. So kind of trending in the wrong direction, but that's okay because you look at the 2 guys that had the biggest snap share respectively between that is Trey Tucker, 95% of the snaps, and he had 0 for 2 targets. So the DK community is going to be like, oh, he had no production, so he's not gonna be chalky like he was last week because of a couple of really strong weeks in weeks 3 and 4. But DJ Turner had in his stead a ton of snaps. He was up to 67%, 74% each of the last 2 weeks. I mean, they're gonna throw to somebody. I mean, Christian Wilkerson and Alex Bachman.
Don't even know who they are. And I'm a Raiders fan.
Yeah.
Like,
so that's
bad.
all you really got. DJ Turner 3,400, Trey Tucker 4,200. I don't know if it's even worth it to do a double, but because of the lack of options, if you want to go all the way down to Aiden, pairing him with one of them is fine.
Right.
Zamir White has missed each of the last 2 games. Actually, don't know top of my head if he is returned to practice. I guess he was limited. Wednesday. So I guess he's training to maybe return. Alex Madison has been solid as a pass catcher. I believe he had a touchdown this past week. 19 opportunities, obviously 18 the week before. So if he is indeed out, he's still 55, a solid value as well. And, stackable because of the target share that he also gets.
Right, of course. And then one more game we're going to grab. Let me go get it. It's the New York Giants, New York Football Giants. We've had them as a puke stack before. We're going to do it again. Why not? It was the second puke stack behind Andy Dalton. Daniel Jones starting it off with, I don't know. I'll put both of them in there, but I'm not sure if Devin Singletary practiced.
So it looks like he I believe missed yesterday, but he was limited today. So the thing is, Tyrone Tracy's been really strong in his absence, and I think over time he's just going to take that role anyway.
Right.
But once he gets back, maybe it gets back to a 50-50 split for a couple weeks before he truly takes that role.
Yeah.
But the basic premise of this kind of scheme is you can't say that Daniel Jones is the butt of jokes right now because he's playing really, really solid football, especially with the receiving core that he has. Obviously, Andrew Thomas is now out for the season, his left tackle due to injury, so that is a tough thing because they were one of the worst in the NFL at pass blocking last year.
And that's their best pass blocker.
Exactly.
Best player on that.
But on the bright side, on the positive note, Malik Neighbors looking and trending to return after missing 2 weeks with a concussion. 7,500, but when we last saw him, 15 targets a game through 3 weeks. He was wide receiver 1 overall when he went down with an injury in week 4 at the very end of the Cowboys game. I don't expect any kind of limitations with him returning from a concussion in terms of snap counts. That's not typically something that correlates, but it was just the kind of quietness of a short or a long extra 3 days to return. And then it was just like he's still in phase 1 and then he's still there. And
twice.
It's just like, when is it going to happen? And then now it's like, oh, okay, it's ramping up again. So I guess it was just a really tough symptomatics were just not going away. But in his absence, Wan'Dale Robinson, really strong target share, 14 targets in the same game that Malik also had 15.
That was crazy.
Obviously, Seattle wide receiver, or he was one of the top wide receivers there. He was a very chalky guy, but 9 targets, very strong work share, and then 11 targets last week. He just hasn't done as well as Darius Slayton, I don't know why there's 1,000 difference based on the last 2 weeks because he had 11 targets in both games. He was the optimal cheap guy in week 5 against the Seahawks. I was upset that I brought him up on the stream and we just didn't play him.
Yeah.
And it was like, damn, what are we going to do? But last week he was their best receiver in the game against Cincinnati. It was just kind of a stalemate of a game. But he's in play as well. Philly has not been a great secondary this year. Obviously, they let Cleveland hang around way too long. But Theo Johnson, another kind of similar to Jatavion Sanders, where he's getting the snaps, he just wasn't getting the shares. Well, 5 targets, 3 targets each of the last 2 weeks, caught all 8, 9.8 points, 6 points. You'll take that every day when you're looking for only 3,000. So that's in play.
When your quarterback starts getting more comfortable with you and you're a rookie, that's good. You know, and he had the highest snap share of the year last year at 89%. So,
and then if you're looking for a full, contrarian stack, because this is one of our contrarian games of the week, we didn't bring up our favorite 2, but it is the Rams Raiders and then Eagles Giants, which is what we're talking about. It is the Saquon revenge game. So it's not obviously a great matchup for Saquon, but he's one of those dominant running backs as we transition out of the quarterbacks that we're not even we haven't really thought about playing much. But yet he's still one of the top running backs on the season so far. Yeah. He had a dud last week, but it wasn't a great matchup. 22 fantasy points a game, 5 touchdowns. He's stealing the tush push work from Jalen Hurts. So obviously the narrative's there, and I think he'll be fairly popular because of the narrative itself. But there are a ton of great running back matchups this week. If you just want to filter out, obviously we talked about Kyron and the matchup he has against the Raiders. Christian McCaffrey isn't going to look to return. Tough matchup for Jordan Mason, but still unknown for him. Jonathan Taylor was somebody that I wouldn't be concerned about if the ankle sprain, if he did return from it. But he was a DNP again today.
Mm-hmm.
So kind of like a wait and see thing, but he's going to be low owned because he is going to be probably trending towards a game time decision. So if he does play, he's going to be lower owned, but in a great spot. You saw what Tajay Spears and Tony Pollard did to them in week 5 before their bye. Kenneth Walker against Atlanta. He is going against a team that has allowed at least 70 rushing yards to every single running back they've played this year. So they haven't been terrible against running backs. Obviously, you see the 7th against the position, respectively, but that's just a lack of touchdowns to me because the yardage is there.
Exactly.
And with Kenneth Walker, he's been a great goal line back. He's been, I believe, 5 touchdowns, and that's with missing 2 games.
Mm-hmm.
So really good spot for him. Joe Mixon, we saw him return and do great. Saquon, 3 touchdown game against Green Bay. They just haven't had enough elite running backs play against them. But if there is just one Houston player that I have the most confidence in against Green Bay, it is Joe Mixon this week.
Yeah.
Bijan Robinson against Seattle. Seattle, we saw Isaac Guerrero go for a 75-yard run. We saw Jordan Mason be well on his way to some of our props that we loved, and he went down with an injury. So great spot for them. Seattle's really dropping 3 straight. But then you see a bunch of Q tags, and this is what was the comfortable thing we were waiting on. James Cook returned to practice in full. So it's not even a great matchup to begin with, but because what we saw with Ray Davis and how he really truly took their load on Monday Night Football, he's all the way at 52 because the prices came out. Well, now it's like, I don't know if I can play that anymore.
No.
Devon Achane, he's back with the concussion. So Raheem Mostert being 61, out the door. Brian Robinson, we thought, could miss again. Austin Eckler, well, he's back. Aaron Jones, he's limited. So it sounds like the majority of these guys are looking to play. One thing, I don't know why Nick Chubb's out is still showing, but I mean, he's been limited each of the last 2 weeks, but still no guarantee of the workload.
Yeah.
But it is worth noting Jerome Ford is now week to week with a hammy injury.
Mm-hmm.
And so if he doesn't play, that opens up a Deontay Foreman if you wanted to go that route, obviously being at home against Cincinnati. You saw what Tyrone Tracy just did. He was very serviceable. Kareem Hunt, as long as CEH is not really eating into his workload, I don't know why he would, but him being only 6,000, very reasonable. You saw before the bye week,
crazy
21.7 fantasy points, 28 opportunities.
Nuts.
Played very strongly against a really, what we thought at the time was a good run defense, but then we saw what Sean Tucker and Bucky Irving did to them on this past
51
Sunday.
points.
So, but yeah, I mean, it's just kind of all over the place, but there are really solid spots. Chase Brown, another guy that's kind of really
taken over
for Zach Moss as well. He had the game ice touchdown against the Giants.
I'm surprised Trey Sermon doesn't have a Q tag next to his name. He does. Okay, it didn't. But yeah, he actually returned to practice today, but I don't know if he'll play either. I was going to ask you, JT and Trey Sermon out. You go straight.
Goodson.
Yeah, bam. Look at that guy.
Shoot, I mean,
he plays,
at least he's a pass catcher.
Yeah,
is what I'll say. He had 8 targets over the last 2 weeks. A little bit more efficient. Most of that from week 6 was, and again, it's a good run defense, but a 33-yard gain was really what kind of salvaged it. But Trey Sermon's been terrible in his 2 starts.
I think he just is.
He just is terrible, and he just was a miss and is what it is. With that regard, being a former 3rd-round pick, he's been hopping around. But yeah, running back, a lot of good matchups. Not as much value as we thought, but it's kind of like, we're not really living in the running back range like we did last week, where there was we were thinking a lot of lines being 3 running back sets. Probably get away with just 2, whether that's double high, 1 high, 1 low, both mid-tier. There's a lot of ways to go.
We also didn't talk about certain players that we had talked about with their stacks. I mean, Chuba Hubbard's still in play. Certain guys that we had talked about earlier that were already in there. So going to the next thing, philosophies for wide receiver and tight end instead of just going through all of them. I know that there's certain wide receivers that you want to get to, Justin Jefferson being one of them.
One I really want to note is Juju Smith-Schuster is completely mispriced.
Right.
I know we don't cover FanDuel from a content perspective this year, but we do play lines, and we'll give shout outs if you ask for questions in Discord. We had a guy that took down a showdown this past week,
Yeah.
won over $9,000, taking advice and stuff, and we'll play, and we'll give advice when due. But on that platform, he's 6,100.
That's
2,100 price difference. You don't really see that often. I don't really know what they were looking at. He's going to be very chalky, but if he does stay as a wide receiver one role, it's not going to be Xavier Worthy. And even if it is, 2,500 is just way too much to just guess and assume that that's going to be the case. I mean, you saw last week where Juju was still 67% of the snaps, but I mean, Justin Watson was the guy that I was high on, and I apologize for convincing you against Juju as the cheap guy on the showdown slate. But Watson had all the same amount of snaps, but he just had no targets. And Juju went all the way up to 67%, but then McCole Hardman and Sky Morris stayed all the way down. Nobody else touched the field.
Yeah.
And it pretty much was just like, we're riding with these three guys, but Juju was the one that led the team in targets.
Yeah. So, and then at tight end, the philosophy for tight end is basically high or low, in my personal opinion. I mean, these three guys all have the best matchups. And then you go all the way to the bottom, and you can get a 2,900 Jatavian Sanders. You can get a 2,800 Theo Johnson. You can get Eric All, who hasn't had. He had 3 targets. First one that he didn't catch was a batted pass. It was not on him. The first one he didn't catch was a batted pass. But
he's caught every single target thrown his way. He just hasn't scored yet. But again, his price is not coming up, and his snaps are kind of staying the same. So this whole range is basically touchdown or bust. But we've kind of nailed a couple of these recently. So it's always fun to go that direction. Again, I wanted to mention Zach Ertz that just went 4 for 68 last week. He's been serviceable. And obviously we talked about our like for Jaden Daniels, but he's been basically if there is a wide receiver too, or a second option that's not a running back, he's been that in terms of snap share, but it's not like it's a consistent, like, startable person every single week in and week out.
For sure.
Colby Parkinson, we talked about the target outlier game, probably is what it is, but I mean, it's really a gross range. Grant Calcaterra, obviously Dallas Goedert is out. He's week to week with a hamstring injury. He came in his place 4 for 67, caught all 4 targets, and being only $3,200,
reasonable. Nice start throw. Shoot.
Yeah, I don't see really a true dominant, guy that's just going to take all the ownership. I think Brock Bowers is somebody that we love. That was a candidate for the thumbnail on this episode that I think might have a chance to be the highest owned. I'm actually loading the optimizer now to see an update. But I mean, it's Travis Kelce at 9.9%.
Yeah.
So every single tight end right now is below 9. I probably would anticipate both Kelce, Bowers, and Kittle actually all being above 10%. And then everybody else kind of being
that's fair,
8 or less. But I mean, if you think Kyle Pitts, it's gross to think about, but we started him a couple years ago against Seattle, and he should have had a 200-yard first quarter, and he was just overthrown by Marcus Mariota and what have you. He's had back-to-back games where he hit the over on the first play, his first opportunity, and then last week he had a 54-yard reception.
Right.
He just hasn't scored, and he's only 45. He's not going to be owned. Who cares?
Njoku's interesting too.
Njoku, obviously, Amari Cooper was traded as well. His first game back. Obviously, he came back in week 5, but left the game with another injury. But last week, 5 for 31, fine, but also Amari Cooper's back, and all they have left. Amari Cooper's gone, and all they really have left is Elijah Moore, who not only is banged up, but he's not good at football, and then Jerry Jeudy, who's been very underwhelming.
And the running backs, I guess.
And the running backs, throw it at them if they're playing.
Yeah, so whoever plays.
He's really, by default, the only option.
Yeah.
And he's only 41, so sure.
Reasonable. Yeah. Defensively, we're going to go to the bottom. Looking at the Browns as one of our main ones. You could reason me into saying the Titans, as long as you don't think that. I think that game hits the under. I think that's a grind it kind of game. But otherwise, who do you like?
The thing is with the Browns, I mean, look at their game log real quick. It doesn't feel good, but they're at home. We've seen weird things happen. They played Cincinnati tough in the past, and they have 5 straight games where they have had over 6 fantasy points. If I'm playing 2,500 or less, I'm looking for 5. Can you give me 5?
Right.
And Cincinnati's offensive line obviously is not great, And last week, if it weren't for a 47-yard out of nowhere touchdown run by Joe Burrow and an iced
Yeah, it was
touchdown
crazy.
run by Chase Brown, they didn't score a touchdown in
Yeah.
between those. So it's not like they're humming offensively that they could put up 40. It's just a game I think could just be an ugly 20-10 game. And if you just keep them under 30, we've had a couple times where we've gone all the way cheap at defense, but that defense can't keep them below 40.
Right.
So, I mean, just keep them below 30, and I think you can get a reasonable
6
amount.
points out of them.
And the thing is, even if you only get 2 or 3, as long as you're nailing the things that you're spending up on.
Yeah.
Last week, the problem wasn't our defense scoring 1 or 2. It's Dak scoring 5 in his worst game that we've seen in a long time, or CD playing well, but not
getting pulled,
not for
also.
the price that he had. Jake Ferguson and obviously Jalen Tolbert, who was chalky, not working out either. Those are the problems. It wasn't the defense. So that's kind of what you got to look at when you're looking at these defenses, and you're going to have the random ones where there's defensive special teams touchdowns. And New Orleans defense last week gave up 50 and still had 7 fantasy points because they had 3 interceptions and a kick return touchdown. So it's just those things happen and they're random and weird. So just try to fit that in and don't worry too much on defenses. Usually there's not really many that we just smash spot.
Yeah, for sure.
That are that high owned.
All right, let's make some lines. Let's do let's do some lines. What quarterback do you want to start with? What game do you want to start with?
So my first look, I'm going to start with Andy Dalton. We're going to go back to him.
All right, ready to go.
This is different from what I had on my first look when we did this
originally. Yeah, so I'm gonna.
And it's mainly because of Jacoby Myers being out, and then also
right.
Andy Dalton's fun.
Do you want Deontay?
So yeah, we're gonna go Deontay, and we're just gonna go top to bottom because the last guy in will be included in this stack.
Okay.
Brian Robinson is who we're gonna do a bring back with, and
I'm past him. Sorry. I see why. He was also one of the guys we ruled out.
Yeah, we weren't anticipating him playing. Eckler was in my initial first look, and then also Kyron Williams.
Gotcha.
The thumbnail, got to put him in.
Okay, that's easy. All right.
And so we're gonna go with our other thumbnail, Mr. Justin Jefferson, being at 85.
Oh, we're both gonna do this. Okay.
Probably.
Yeah.
It's gonna be a heavy dosage. The problem is it's really hard to bring back on the Detroit side in that game. So we're gonna have to force ways with that with our final looks when we talk about this on Sunday. But for now, it's gonna be a solo play for him. But we already talked about Deontay being in the line. I'm gonna put in a chalky Juju Smith-Schuster. He just opens up some salary.
Past him. Good.
And then we're gonna do a bring back of Kyron Williams with Mr. Brock Bowers, our favorite tight end this week.
Brock Bowers, perfect.
And then our last guy in, obviously, you see under 3,000. What does that mean? And kind of what I did a premonition of earlier is like Jalen Coker is the guy on RotoWire that is one of the higher values, and it's just because of snap share and recent targets. Well, I don't feel better about him than a Jatavion Sanders who's getting 80 to 90% of the snaps.
Perfect.
So that's why I ended up doing this. And
there's a nice double.
You don't like that, go down to Tennessee and then put in Coker.
Right.
And that's just kind of how I approached this first line, and I just kind of feel better about Jatavion as a standalone play.
Okay, cool. I like that. That's one of our pukes. I'm actually going to do a puke stack also. That's how I'm going to start mine. We're going to go with the Raiders because I'm a Raiders fan and I get to talk about them. Where is Mr. O'Connell? Bam. I'm going to go to, I do want, obviously, both. We just talked about the thumbnails for a reason. They're going to both be in my line. I'm going to get Brock Bowers as my first stack. Where are you, Brock? There you are. Right at the top where you should be. Go all the way down to, I've thought about this. I was thinking about going all the way down to DJ Turner. He makes a lot of things work.
I mean, I don't mind either way. I think it's going to be very low owned, let alone an Aiden O'Connell play.
Right.
A double stack of him is just going to be even more random. I mean, I'm looking at.
Yeah, I wonder what those numbers are.
The ownership of all the way down, sir. He is the lowest owned quarterback on the entire slate. So obviously he's showing right now at 0. I don't think he'll be 0% owned.
No,
but say he's like 1 or 2% owned. It's not a terrible matchup. And all the guys that you're going to play as a Raider, obviously Brock Bowers, we said it's projected to be 10. He'll probably be north of 10, but nobody's going to stack. And then obviously DJ Turner down at 3.3%. You have Trey Tucker at 3.5%. And obviously those will probably inflate a little bit, especially if Jacoby Myers is out. But Nobody's going to do that. So I'm completely open to that interpretation.
Perfect. The next guy I want to get is a running back. Hear my dog down there. Where is my guy? I was looking at Chuba. I was thinking Chuba into existence, but I was also like, okay, what I could get a Detroit player. It would leave me 5,200. Let's see what's down there. 5,200 for my flex. Is there anything good?
Wish I could say Ray Davis.
I know. That was a good thought. I was gonna go with one of the Carolina guys, but
it could be Leggett. It could be, we talked about
Algier.
the Houston and Green Bay game.
Yeah.
Christian Watson's at 49, kind of reasonable price.
Kincaid.
Just kind of spitballing a little bit.
Yeah.
But, or double tight end. Don't not against that as well, obviously.
I could also go down at running back to maybe Chuba or Brian Robinson in this line would make some sense. Let's do Brian Robinson. 5,700 gives me a little more option, couple more options. Josh Downs has been awesome this year.
But
when
Richardson's back, so
yeah, that's exactly what I was gonna say. When he's not the main quarterback. This is all gross, kind of actually. So I need more money.
The 5K range isn't fun this week.
No, I want Eckler. That's what I wanted. Well, screw it.
Well, I mean, you're not
throw
gonna
Eckler
put
in
Eckler and Robinson in, right?
Oh no! I wanted Chuba and Eckler, and now I can't do it anyways. That's my bad. Because I was gonna go Chuba, Eckler, and then go down to Titans, but now I'm still 100.
So one thing, if math is mathing right now, if you went all the way down to DJ Turner instead of Tucker, that opens up 800.
Okay.
And if I am understanding that should be enough.
Whoa.
He's 34, right?
Yeah, somewhere in here.
Yeah, 34. And so, yeah, that's enough for Brian Robinson and Chuba Hubbard.
Beautiful. Let's do that. I like that a lot.
Yeah, so then you get a very nice bring back in a game that, honestly, that's one of the more underrated games, despite being the highest total, just because I don't think the ownership is going to be warranted for all of that. Obviously, we saw a chalky Chuba last week. Right now, let me see
I love that line.
Chuba looks like about 14%.
Yeah,
still
reasonable.
Among the top 5 running backs. But he's kind of on the outside of that rather than on the inside, and then Brian Robinson right behind him as well. So
cool. And Kyron in this line. I mean, like we said, we're going to want as many running backs as possible. Bijan is actually the number 1 rostered running back on the slate.
Which it said that last week too, or 2 weeks ago, and it was not the case. So sometimes it's take it with a grain of salt. Obviously, last week finally had his breakout game that we've been frustratingly looking for.
Right.
And then they end up blowing the Panthers out. So I know Algier ended up with more touches and the snaps were even. Algier, the majority of his workload came after his 2 touchdown performance and what have you.
Right.
But both of them could feast. And if you didn't believe in Bijan, Tyler Algier is not going to be that owned. And he's in the same spot, and he's 5,100. He's 5%. 2%.
Oh, 2%. Even better.
So if we play 5 lines like we typically have, if we just played 1 line with Tyler, we're going to be 10x the field.
He might be in my fantasy team this week, so he might be starting for me because of injuries and stuff. So it's an option for sure. Let me stop sharing. We appreciate y'all hanging out with us. We had to get this out, later than normal, but that's actually been a good thing because of all the injuries.
Right. Yeah. I mean, a lot of the stuff was obviously the core remained the same. Knock on wood, without injuries to those guys, but
right.
Obviously with other people being out that we didn't expect, or a lot of the running backs that we were like, oh, running backs are in shambles this week. Well, most of them were playing. So it's just kind of one of those things where value's honestly kind of gross this week. And I don't think that there's a single line you're going to play that you're just like all 9 I'm comfortable with, like you would on a FanDuel slate or a chalky slate like we've had in recent weeks. And obviously we dealt with the Jordan Mason being too cheap and a Chuba being too cheap, where you've got guys that are north of 30%. This is a pretty spread out slate, I think.
Yeah.
And it'll reap that in the roster percentages, but that could turn into a wild card week that you're not confident, but that's the week that you end up taking down.
For sure. Well, we really appreciate y'all hanging out with us. If you aren't in the Discord, go get in there. Like, comment, and subscribe on this video. Comment if you have any players that you're like, I think this guy's a good value. We'll talk to you if you have questions. And if not, you can always meet us on Sunday and ask any questions you want. We can build lines together, and it's a lot of fun. So we'll see y'all next time.
Yep. See you on Sunday, guys.